Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. As you may have noticed, I'm not in my normal environment, so you could probably guess that we're not going to have one of our normal videos, which is true. Unfortunately, after the plethora of electional opportunities that we had for our Taurus full moon video, we don't have much of anything to write home about for this 2-week period. And that's primarily due to the retrograde motion of Saturn and Mercury, which has knocked them out of any real being able to be utilized at all. And of course, this is going to get compounded later on, where we have Jupiter, who will retrograde in about a month. So we'll kind of see how that goes. And then, of course, just some other things, the moon being uncooperative and applying to planets that I don't want it to apply to at specific times. So all that happened, which means that we're not really going to have any electional opportunities to talk about for this 2-week period, which is probably fine, since this is, of course, coming out on the Sagittarius lunar eclipse, and magic is not, astrological magic is not something that is a tool to be utilized during eclipses, except for very specific purposes. So it's probably fine that we don't really have anything to do this next couple of weeks. We should probably, take in kind of the meaning of the eclipse here and just kind of cleanse, wash, and rest, and just kind of ready ourselves for whatever the next 2 weeks will bring us. And so just because we don't have, electional opportunities to talk about doesn't mean that we can't take this time to talk about something else kind of for this space that's typically reserved for these conversations. So I shot out a question to my Patreon to ask patrons sort of what they've been thinking about or any questions that they might have that they want to kind of have, talked about more at length or whatever, or have kind of some space dedicated to. And I got a couple of responses that I thought would do well as like a 1-2 combo to talk about. So we're going to do that today. So the response I got from D was that they found themselves a bit confused about how lunar mansion talismans are made. They mean how the ritual procedure might differ from a planetary talisman, what would work for a typical lunar mansion talisman versus what would fly as a planetary one. Not necessarily details about my personal checklist, but more like a procedural checklist to look out. And so I thought that was a good question. And then it ended up pairing up very nicely with another question that I received later via DMs about ways to work with talismans instead of them just lying there, kind of what you should do. So I thought this was really great because it's sort of like, how do I make a talisman? And then now what do I do with it? Sort of a thing. So we're going to talk about that. So when it comes to making astrological talismans, there's like an unfortunately large number of hurdles to get across. First is you have to, find the proper astrological timing to do the thing under, which is something that hopefully this channel has helped somebody out there to do. That's sort of the purpose of my Magical Elections video series, is to help people make those plans. So that I've kind of taken care of for you. Most of the time, even though, I can't do it for everywhere in the world, obviously, and some of my considerations may not be what people want, or, things like that, kind of procedural personal differences. The second thing you have to overcome is the materials required. So you have to get like the right materials that match up with the planet that you're working with, the lunar mansion that you're working with, or the fixed star that you're working with. So material acquisition can be a hurdle at times, but this is kind of like one of the good things about globalization, I guess, is that you can pretty much get anything from anywhere in the world, which helps with that. But the third step is actually like the ritual process, and this is where we have like infuriatingly little information in source texts about like what exactly you're supposed to do during this time, like what that looks like. So the text will tell you a lot about, this is sort of the general astrological configuration that you're looking for. Here's some background rules about electional astrology generally and how it affects planets that you should know before coming into this. Here's some materials that you need, and then it's like, good luck. It's like, phew, now you have to ride the bicycle down the hill by yourself. So for some people, they might find this sort of lack of information to be very, very like freedom giving. They may love it because then kind of the implication is just sort of whatever you want to do, you can do, which is where I've kind of landed with it myself. But for those of us like me, which have more dry temperaments and want things like, I need a bulleted list, I need to make sure I'm not going to hurt myself, I need to make sure I'm not going to offend anybody, insofar as like social spirit offenses go. It can be very anxiety inducing for some individuals who want those more step-by-step, how do I handle this kind of situation, which is totally fine. Every way is totally fine. It's just two different people. You have your wet temperaments, which are more like, yes, I can do what I want, and dry temperaments that are like, oh, how, in what way am I going to mess this up without having without having a checklist. So when it comes to the texts, like the actual materials, basically the only thing that we're told is that like the talisman needs to be created during the elected time. So like that's kind of as far as we go. Or they may offer like a small prayer that that they suggest, which it would be like for lunar mansions, the prayer in Picatrix is basically just like, you insert spirit of mansion's name, do such and such for me, and then like make your request, and it's like done. That's it. So, as somebody who's sort of gone through this analysis paralysis myself, as when I first got involved in astrological magic, I didn't really have any background in like traditional magic other than, say, like the Solomonic magic tradition from the Keys of Solomon, which takes a very different outlook on what exactly spirit invocation is and how you should do it. So that tradition has like a big focus on ritual preparation, on tools that you need to have, on protective procedures you need to take, things like that. Whereas the astrological magic tradition is much more freewheeling, leading to those feelings of anxiety that I kind of just mentioned. So having gone through all that, I have, for those of you who are unfamiliar, have maybe never noticed it, or are newer to the astrological magic election series, in the description of each of the videos, I include a link to an article that I wrote on my website that kind of talks about my kind of 4-step process for talismanic creation, like what you should do, and from there. Like, it's very open-ended, because the main point for me was that it needs to be very personal, whatever you want to do. So if it's something that you already have, like if you already have like a personal magical practice or ritual practice or prayer practice, then astrological talisman crafting is something that you can do very easily, because you already have a structure for that. It's just about like weaving the two together in a synergistic way. It's basically all that you want. For people who are newer to it or don't have like a hard system down for how they like to do things, I have an article that lists kind of 4 steps that you need to do, that I think you need to do, I guess, or the things that I thought were important in my own practice that I do, as well as like kind of some miniature things that you need to include in them. And so we're going to kind of walk through that for people who are newer to the process, or who maybe have never noticed the article before, but definitely go and check it out for more information as well. So after you've kind of gone through the whole process of identifying what celestial spirit you are going to invoke or work with, and then finding the right time for it, and then gathering your materials, it's time for, the ritual itself. And so I kind of break down rituals into 4 distinct phases or steps that you need. You need an opening, you need an invocation, you need a crafting, and you need a closing. But other than that, I mean, you can do whatever you want. But I think those 4 things are the most important, and you can add on to them and take away, whatever you want to do. This is just kind of like an outline of what I do to give ideas for people who maybe have never done it before, or maybe feel like they're not doing enough in some sense. Because if you feel like you're not doing enough, you definitely are doing enough, I'm sure. There's not super a wrong way to do it, which is both very freeing and very anxiety-inducing. So the first step is the opening, and this I think is really important because it kind of sets the tone for the whole ritual work. Like, everything that you're going to do is going to be set by kind of what you do in the opening. And all the opening really is like the creation of the intention or the sacred space surrounding whatever workspace you're going to be in, whether that's like the altar or the workbench or just whatever. The opening or the creation of sacred space sets the tone for the environment and for that moment in time to then make something productive out of. So for those of you who come at this from a more like modern witchcraft or Wicca background, kind of the same thing would be like the invocation of the 4 directions or the 4 elements that kind of like set your space as like guardians of the corners or things like that. And like the directions and the elements aren't like the reason you're doing the ritual, right? They're just kind of the first step to build up and kind of create and enforce those sacred boundaries. So kind of whatever that looks like in your own practice or kind of in your own head, that would be what you would do first. Just kind of set that stage. The second step is where we really get into like the ritual itself, and this is with the invocation. And now the invocation is the things that you do or say to call up or down, I guess in this case, whatever celestial spirit it is that you're trying to work with, whether that be a planetary spirit or a spirit of a lunar mansion or of a fixed star or of a decan or whatever that you're working with. This can even be something that's non-astrological, and this would be more akin to like. This is kind of where you would, like the incense, which is a material invocation of the spirit that you're working with. And you would offer up any sort of like prayers or calls or like summoning recitations or anything like that. Like, this is where that part is. This is the beginning, the opening it up, and like dialing the phone number for the spirit that you're trying to reach in the only way that Astral Thurgis really can, which is through through offerings, whether that is incense or like actual offerings, whether that's like foods or items, whatever, and proper spirit invocation through the utilization of like prayers or petitions, or just kind of like standard invocations. And Picatrix has helpful calls to the planets as an example of what I'm talking about here, but you can obviously you can write your own. Hello, Ollie. Come here. Yeah, come here. Come here. Come here. Oh, this is Oliver. He's really cute. He's really sweet. Except for he likes to bully some of the other cats, so he's not super cute and sweet all the time. Look, they're twins. It's like, what is that? I'll get there and mess with it. The invocation phase of the ritual can also be called the opening the can of wet cat food phase, as it summons forth the spirits with a quickness. So after you've done your opening, and after you have done the invocation, and you've done the proper amount of recitations, whatever that looks like to you, or the spirit that you're working with, the planets have numbers that are associated with them that you might want to work with, things like that. Oliver, he's bullying a cat right now. I told you he was trouble. Oh, that's so rude. He just kicked a cat out of its sleep. Oh, now he's going back after her. This is a mess, you guys. This is becoming a drama. Hey. Come here, baby. This is the sweetheart that he's bullying, little baby Lily. Here, stay here. She won't stay there. She'll just run right back into trouble. So after you've done the opening, you've set the sacred space, and you've done the invocation where you offer up materials or incense or offerings, and you've done the proper prayers and recitations, either the proper amount of times or in their fullness. Now it's time to move on to crafting, where you actually do that thing. Whatever it was that you were planning on doing for the talisman creation itself, you would do at this time. So this is where you kind of have to be like time management, right? So you have an election window, which is the optimum time to make the talisman or to complete the ritual. So you need to start before this happens, because you need to do the opening and the invocation before the ritual time actually starts, because you need to have probably as much time as you need for the actual crafting of the talisman itself, whether that's making jewelry or finalizing jewelry for talismanic jewelry, or drawing or painting or whatever it is, whatever talismanic thing that you're doing. If you're using like a metal medium or a gem medium, which requires like engraving, or like a more paper medium, which is more drawing type of thing, more drawing images, you need to do that during the actual crafting period. And you don't really need to do anything else other than do the work that you're doing. But you can do other things. Obviously, you can do Ophoric hymns, or continue to recite invocations or prayers to the celestial spirit. Anything like that, totally fine. But it's mostly just the focused on the actual making the thing, because you need it to be done-ish by the time that this election window closes. And then the final step is the actual closing itself. This is where you thank everything that got involved in the procedure. You thank the spirit that you made the talisman of. You thank whatever entities or powers that you called for to help you set the space, just anything like that. And you just kind of let everything end. Like, you just kind of close everything down respectfully, ask everything to leave that came there, say thank you, all that mess, show some reverence. And then you're basically done. Like, the process is not actually difficult, but it can be a little anxiety-inducing, as I've kept saying, to actually sit down and kind of come up with what am I supposed to do, how am I supposed to do it, because the source texts are very open. They don't give us any information about this. And to sort of kind of continue on with answering Dee's question more directly, sort of like what would work for a lunar mansion talisman versus what would work for like a fixed star talisman, or what would work for like a planetary talisman or things like that, insofar as like ritual procedure. I actually think there's a lot of overlap, and you can pretty much do the same thing for all of them. Like, you have like a similar ritual structure you can follow for any order of the sort of celestial hierarchy. I don't think that they're very different in those regards. What's more important is like dialing in the correct channel, really, through your invocation and the materials that you offer up and the materials that you're working with. That's really more important to kind of like get the materials and the prayers and the recitation right, because you need to make sure that the spirit that you want is actually the one that's on the other end of that line, really, before you can really commit to making the talisman or anything like that. So the procedure can pretty much be the same, which may be a little bit of a letdown, or you can make them differently if you want to. I know for myself, I tend to regard the planetary talismans with a little bit more like pomp and circumstance, we'll say, whereas the lunar mansion or the fixed star talismans are a little bit more ordinary. For myself, and that's primarily because I view lunar mansions and fixed stars as being a bit more everyday, because the moon moves through and will contact all the fixed stars and lunar mansions within the 27.3 day sidereal cycle that she has, while the planetary talismans are a bit more special events and may only be annually or every so many years. So hopefully this sort of 4-step ritual process helps those of you who were like me and kind of went through this like anxiety, fear phase of, I don't want to mess anything up. How do I make sure I do this right and well? And that's a system that has worked very, very well for me. I encourage you to take it and make it your own, do your own thing with it, add more steps, take steps away, whatever. But it's just kind of like a very easy step-by-step process. The most important thing is like respect and dedication, which segues us very easily into our second question of basically, I have a talisman, what do I do with it? And there are a couple of different ways you can go about it. The more interesting aspect of astrological magic and kind of the astral theurgy that it implies or necessitates is that it's not so much about like creating a talisman and leaving it there, or having like a commanding relationship with a celestial spirit. Kind of something that we might see more in like the Talismanic tradition that I mentioned earlier. In astral theurgy, it's much more the opposite. Like it's more flipped, to where the understanding is the celestial spirit is actually more superior to us, and we are humble servants looking to establish a better relationship with this celestial spirit. And this kind of sets the foundation of like astrological remediation, repairing a relationship from one that hinders us or causes us difficulty or harm to one that is much more supportive and like life sustaining or good experience sustaining. So that means the basic idea of creating a planetary talisman, or an astrological talisman, doesn't have to be planetary, is to have a channel or a medium through which to have a proper relationship with a celestial spirit. So that means that the talismans are kind of meant to be a little bit more interactive than maybe it sounds like on the surface. But you can definitely have that sort of more passive experience with talismans, to where you make them for a purpose and you kind of store the talismans in the place that is related to their purpose, which is sort of normally how I recommend people who are getting started work with it. So let's say you make a talisman for job opportunities or for raises or for promotions at work. Then you make the talisman and you would want to keep it at your work desk, whether that is your home office or your office at the office, whatever. But it, kind of in that environment where it can more easily reach out and do stuff. If you're making a talisman for like financial gain, financial success, maybe you keep it with your bank account statements, things like that, old credit cards, whatever. If you're making a talisman for health, maybe you keep it under your pillow or under your mattress. And that can be a very effective, more passive method of working with talismans, which is totally fine. But one thing that you kind of should be doing or striving more towards after you've kind of established this more passive relationship is working towards a more active one. And there are several different ways that you can do this. The first step that you should really be doing after you've made a talisman is planning for what I call the recharge ritual. I'm pretty sure Christopher Warnock talked about this in one of his books. I don't believe I made it up. But basically the idea is that you want to reconnect with the talisman every so often to be able to kind of reestablish that connection, re-energize it to an extent, and sort of re-strategize and reflect. A lot of re-words here. Reflect on what has happened during the time that the talisman has been under your care, and how that may have worked to affect events that you've experienced during that time, and how you might be able to like re-strategize what you want the talisman to help you do. So this is something, the recharge ritual is something that for lunar mansions and fixed star talismans should occur when the moon has come back to that lunar mansion or fixed star. So roughly every 27 days, you should be doing a recharge ritual for for the lunar mansions and fixed star talismans. And this is just kind of a very simple, Risa fumigate, talk to the talisman, meditate with the talisman on its image, what it's done, what you suspect it may have done, and just sort of like talk to it, check in with it, see kind of what you think, kind of what direction you think the talisman might be kind of pulling you towards, and whether or not that's the direction that you really want to go, and sort of like pull it back or encourage it to keep moving forward or to kind of change directions. And that's how you start to develop that relationship with that celestial spirit. With planetary talismans, it's a little bit different. Because, like if you made a Saturn and Aquarius talisman, then you can't just wait for Saturn to come back to Aquarius in 30 years to do the recharge ritual. Like, that's not going to work. So usually what happens is the recharge ritual for planetary talismans is done during the weekday of that planet. So Saturday for Saturn, Sunday for the Sun, Monday for the Moon, yada yada. That's usually more what happens. And those those recharge rituals can be more involved because they're planets, or they can be a little bit less involved because they happen more frequently than lunar mansion or fixed star talismans. That's totally up to you. But one important piece of astrological talismans that I think people forget about a lot is that the talismans themselves and the spirits that have, awoken in them essentially are things that you're meant to petition directly. And this is why people put a much bigger focus on planetary talismans, I think, partly because it's very dramatic, I guess, because the planets don't always align in the right configurations. Very rarely do they do that. We might go several years without a really good one for a particular planet. They're much more rare events. But also because by having kind of like encapsulating or awakening the planetary spirit in the piece of jewelry or in the, in the whatever that you've done that in, that's your vehicle, like that's your connection to the planet at that time of the talisman's creation. So this is what you then petition, instead of the planet directly itself in the sky in transit. So if you have, like a Sun in Aries talisman, then you don't need to petition, the Sun in Taurus right now, right? Like, you don't need that. Well, right now at the time of this recording, it's going to be in Gemini by the time it's live. You don't need that. You've got a piece of the Sun in Aries that you can petition whenever the heck you want, to help you, maneuver life through. And that's especially more helpful when it comes to like Jupiter and Saturn and Mars, I guess, too. The planets who aren't in their home signs, or like who aren't in signs that they do well in for very long times. If you've got a Saturn in Aquarius or a Saturn in Capricorn talisman, that's what you petition. That's what you talk to. That's what you ask, because you are reawakening Saturn's effectiveness at that time the talisman was created to do the thing. And this is where we get a much more active utilization of talismans, particularly planetary talismans, because they tend to be viewed as more rare and unique. Whereas with lunar mansion and fixed star talismans, you might have several really good elections for it within the span of a year. So in this sense, a more active utilization of planetary talismans, at least in the practice, the way that I do it, others may have more options for you, is really more about the active participation in a relationship with a spirit who you commune with, who you develop a relationship with, that reflects, of course, some part of you or some part of your life experience based on its situation, based on that planet situation in the natal chart. This is also why I've had something of a change of heart in the past couple of years about continuously wearing talismanic jewelry, where I think that maybe that kind of constant contact with planetary spirits might not be such a great thing, but that might be a conversation for a different time. That's not to say that planetary talismans are somehow specially configured to more easily facilitate these more personal connections to. Ideally, that would be the goal of any astrological talisman that you create. It's just that people tend to invest more in planetary talismans and so make them or get them made from materials that are much more long-lasting. This is where you see, that planetary jewelry that I mentioned before, which can last for generations. Whereas lunar mansions or fixed star talismans tend to be more made of like impermanent material, either from paper, which eventually degrades, or like in my personal practice, I make fixed star talismans out of candles, which eventually burn down. And so in this regard, I think of it more kind of like a succession of generations. So as an example, for one of my altars, I created a rather large pillar candle that is special to that altar. And so every time I work with that altar, I of course burn that candle as part of the ritual process. But when that candle burns down towards the end, I use its remnants to create a new candle. And in my mind, it's sort of like a successive generation of candles that connect, the present day back to when I first established that altar. And today I think I'm on like the 17th generation of altar candles. It's a very similar idea with fixed star and lunar mansions. Just because you have dismissed the spirit or the talisman itself has degraded in some fashion, it doesn't mean that connection is severed. It's more just paused, like an old friend that you haven't talked to in a long time. You can just make another talisman at a different electional date and just kind of continue that relationship from where you left off. Time is meaningless to these celestial spirits, guys. So it doesn't matter if it's been 3 weeks or 7 years since you last worked with that talismanic spirit. They'll remember you and how you worked with them, and so it's important to always come at that with that understanding. So I hope this video has helped to answer some questions, either about talismanic ritual procedure or about what to do with talismans after you actually have them. Admittedly, my own sort of method for active engagement with talismans is probably a little bit basic, but it served me very well, and I know that it can serve you very well as well. Kind of one of the big jumps you need to make in astrological magic is not to regard celestial spirits as, like subservient things to boss around, but as equal partners in, creation and in the maneuvering of one's life. It's really after you make that jump that you have much more profound successes and things get a little bit more easier for you. So hopefully this video helped you kind of to make that jump or kind of get you started in the wind up for that. And then everybody take care, and I will see you guys again on our Gemini solar eclipse.